Welcome everyone to the Flywheel Effect, Bridging the Gap for First-Year Students in a Virtual World, brought to you by the ACRL University Library Section Professional Development Committee. We are delighted to have you and our presenters here today. I am Andrea Wright, she, her, member of the committee. I will be moderating this program along with my colleague, Leanne Romaine, she, her, my fellow committee member. This is one of an ongoing series of online programs sponsored by our committee. Before I introduce our presenters, a few logistics. The live transcript is enabled on this Zoom webinar. If you would like to modify or hide the appearance of the transcript, please use the controls on your Zoom window. The session is being recorded, and we will send the link of the video, slides, and any other supplemental documentation to everyone who registered for the program. The program will run for an hour total, including time for questions. Please feel free to add questions into the chat box throughout the presentation at any time. The presenters will be using progressive stacking to answer questions in the chat. The progressive stack is a technique used to give marginalized groups a greater chance to speak. It's sometimes an introduction to or a stepping stone to consensus decision-making in which simple majorities have less power. The technique works by allowing people to speak on the basis of race, with preference given to members of groups that are considered the most marginalized. If you're Black, Indigenous, or other person of color, please use an asterisk before the question in the chat box. Leanne will be collating them and will be prepared to read them to our panelists, who will introduce in a moment at the appropriate time. As you use the chat feature, please make sure you send your message to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you're asking. We will post a link to a brief evaluation in the chat box after the Q&A session. Please take a few moments to give us your feedback on today's program. With those announcements out of the way, I am very happy to start today's program, The Flywheel Effect. I'll briefly introduce our two presenters, and they can more fully introduce themselves as they see fit. Kay Coates, she, her, is a research services librarian at Georgia Southern University, where she teaches information literacy, catering to all levels in higher education. She serves as the liaison to the College of Education. Vivian Bynoe, she, her, head of reference and instruction at the Armstrong campus, is a library liaison to the College of Education and the TRIO Student Support Services program at Georgia Southern University. TRIO supports first-generation college students, students with disabilities, and low-income students. And without further delay, I will hand it over to our panelists.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Hopefully everyone can see the presentation slides. If at any point you have any issues, feel free to type that information in the chat so we can address them. So today, Kay and I are going to discuss how we can use the Flywheel Effect concept for identifying ways to help bridge the learning gap for first-year students during this COVID-19 pandemic. Our main goal is to show the benefit of applying a business theory to librarianship, which is something you may not have thought about, but hopefully you'll be inspired, once you leave this presentation today to implement something like this, either in your instruction program or in your library. So we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has really caused us to stop and think about how we serve our students. So from this point forward, rather than just going along like we normally do, we should really use this forced pause from the pandemic as an opportunity to really take a unique approach to ensuring that what we do is really meeting the needs of our students. These students may now have different needs because of COVID-19, and I would say post-COVID, but we're still currently, dealing with the pandemic and may continue to deal with it for a while. Some students, through no fault of their own, may not be fully prepared for college. and those of marginalized identities are even at a greater disadvantage as well during this time because of the shift to virtual learning. So Kay and I were talking and reflecting on kind of what we could do to help address this problem. And it dawned on us that this Flywheel strategy from Jim Collins would be a useful approach to take to really take a step back, reflect on what we're doing, and reflect on ways that we can improve. So like I said before, hopefully you'll leave our presentation with the inspiration to just pause, analyze what you're currently doing, and find out ways that you can make lasting change in your library and in your instruction program. So you should see a Padlet link in the chat, and we would like for you to be active participants and respond to the chat question here on the Padlet link. You're still muted, Kay.
So the question is, do the services being provided by your library align with the current needs of your students during COVID-19? If so, how? You know, interestingly, this is the thought that helped Vivian and I to envision what we could possibly do intentionally once we kind of assess what our givens are. And our givens, we thought about our human resources, which would be our instructors and instruction librarians. We'd look at our target audience, which would be our first-year students. Then we look at our resources, mainly our library holdings, and then we look at auxiliary services that are offered on campus, and take all of that into account with the pandemic and the sudden pivot to providing instruction in a virtual environment. So we actually had another question in mind: what practices could inform our efforts? When we ask ourselves, what are we currently doing in our instruction program that correlates to the Flywheel strategy? More so because the Flywheel strategy is like a roadmap that helps you undertake a journey from something that's good and take it to great.
So we'll take a look here at the Padlet responses. And I apologize in advance if you hear the notification, because each time I get a Padlet response, it notifies me on the computer. So we see a lot of people have aligned some of their services to meet the current needs of students during COVID-19. A lot of people are saying that they can still make some changes here. Strategies have evolved over the past year. Some are using social media, which I think is a great idea. I noticed that a lot, that people were doing a lot of programming using Instagram or Discord. A lot of people can see areas where they want to make some changes. So please continue. This will be shared with you once we finish the presentation. So hopefully we can get some ideas generated and going around here.
If I could interject here, Vivian and Kay, we've had a couple of questions for you to go over the definition of the flywheel effect again.
Yep, that's what we're going to do on our next slide. So all right. So we just wanted to kind of get you in the mindset of thinking about what you're doing before we introduce the Flywheel Strategy concept for you all. So right here you see a quote by Jim Collins, actually, who is the creator of the flywheel effect. And he states that what separates people is not the presence or absence of difficulty, but how they deal with the inevitable difficulties of life. So this is really what we're kind of all doing right now, especially during this particular pandemic. So we can't really change anything. We can't change the fact that we're having to deal with COVID-19, but we can identify ways to approach the learning process for students in a different way. So to give you a little bit of a brief background about Jim Collins, he is a well-known business consultant, inspirational management speaker, and lecturer. So he particularly lectures on company sustainability and growth, and he's authored and co-authored various long-lasting international bestsellers, such as Built to Last, which is a book that examines the reasons of extraordinary successes of large companies. So the Good to Great book provides an outline for turning what would be considered just an average company into a great one. So before you kind of ask, okay, well, how does that apply to libraries? He has actually made updates on his Good to Great system as to how it would apply to the social sector or higher education. So Jim Collins and his colleagues undertook a massive 5-year research project to empirically discover what takes a company from good to great. So their findings shed light on the good to great process and offer a roadmap for others willing to take the journey. So even though their research looked at for-profit corporations, the concepts, Kay and I are looking at how the concepts can be applied to making change, either in the library as a whole or within an instruction program, since that's what we do. So within their study, of course, you know, in the for-profit world, success is your company achieving financial performance, and not just within a short amount of time, but long-term. So that was success for them. However, we know that success for us, in our case, would be student success. And more specifically for information literacy, our students really learning the concepts. So the purpose of using a system like this would be to help us to organize an effective instruction program to help address a larger problem with small micro steps that are repeated over time. We all know it can take years to really get to that ultimate goal, but instead of trying to say, okay, we need to come up with this big innovative idea, or always starting something and then stopping and switching and trying something else, this strategy allows you to remain consistent and not be caught in what Jim Collins calls the doom loop. So even though the book was published in the early 2000s, the information is still applicable in organizing a program. So if you look at the diagram here on the slide, you see 3 areas. So like I said before, think of these as small micro actions that can be taken. The most important things to remember are the 3 areas of disciplined people, disciplined thought, and disciplined action. We will go into more details a little bit later and break this down for the library, but we want to show you the actual theory that we're taking this from.
So you might ask, how does the flywheel effect operate with what we had in mind? So we thought that we're looking at our first-year students and we're taking into account virtual learning. And with the flywheel effect, you have to think about the who and the what. Our who would be the people, and the what would be our practices. So this gives us an opportunity to design instruction in such a way as to positively impact learning outcomes by crafting a plan that's built on what currently informs our instruction activities for first-year students, so as to help them to master those higher order skills that they'll need. And so we would have to apply this strategy and simultaneously embed it, which allows us to embed inclusive practices because it caters to all students, all demographics. And so it is intentionally thinking about how to foster student success at an extremely challenging time. And it requires both the instructors as well as the students to step outside comfort zones and dive into experimenting with a novel way of learning and teaching so that we can shore up the support we want to give to our incoming students who would have experienced some disadvantages in terms of continuing their learning based on the fact that they might have had issues with data deserts and stuff like that. So the next question we would ask ourselves, and this is the question we'd want you to think about. Have you asked students about their learning experience during the pandemic and how it can be improved? If not, what are some questions you would ask your students? And the reason we ask this is because lots of times we prepare instructions for students, but we never quite ask them how they're being impacted by the instruction we're giving them. We are lots of times assume that, okay, we've got this all set. However, the Flywheel strategy recommends that we begin with questions. And questions would position instructors to cater to the multivariate needs of the first-year students. And it's based on the reported premise that some of these students lack the opportunity to fully develop essential critical thinking skills needed to handle their coursework and research assignments. And in a sense, which would hinder them in some way being prepared for the college crunch. So our target audience consists of learners as well with varied levels of information literacy skills. Then we have to deal with learner variability. It offers an interesting chance for us to model an information literacy instruction program using this Flywheel strategy, because it allows us to step outside our comfort zone and really pay attention to the requisite needs of our incoming cohort.
So we see here, I've noticed that a couple of people said that they have not specifically asked students about their experience or how it can be improved, but there are other areas on campus that have done that. So maybe one thing to consider would be partnering with someone else or another department on campus that might have easier access to students to be able to do that. I also saw that someone said that they have asked, but they're not getting a response from students. And we all know how that can be with survey fatigue if you're doing it in that way. And it may be that you don't get to asking this question until the fall, possibly, when students, for us, our students are going to be back full swing, on campus in the fall. So that could potentially be a better time to ask these types of questions. I see someone else noted that they do it through informal conversation, which I think is really good.
And that's a good way to do it sometimes, because when you give sometimes people a formal way of answering questions, they say, look, I'm too fatigued, I don't want to be bothered with it. Or they give you an answer and they just give you an answer for the sake of giving you an answer without actually thinking about what really the question is and how they're being impacted by it. So
Yeah. And we all know that we only have, a lot of times we only have one shot in our one shot session. So we'll have to be creative about this, but we'll see in a little bit ways that we can do that using this strategic approach. So keep the responses coming. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a deeper look at the library instruction program and what we can do to make sure that our students are successful. So if you think back to that previous slide where we had the diagram and discipline people, discipline thought, and discipline action, keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. So like Kay said, we're looking at the differences in students, not just in terms of physical diversity or things that we know about, but in learner variability. So the first area of discipline people, we have to make sure that the right people are in the right place. So when Jim Collins came up with this, of course, he was talking about people in the business. Okay, you want to get your right managers in place and right people in the right departments. But in our case, when we say this, we're talking about the librarians within the instruction department and looking at their strengths. What areas, will they feel more efficient in? So it's okay for, people to know what they're good at and what they may not be so comfortable with or good at. And, we all can grow and do professional development, but we have to keep in mind that we don't work in a bubble and we work together as a team. So I know one thing that Kay did within her department, and just to give you a little bit of background, we are a university that has multiple campuses, and we have two different departments that work with our instruction program. So Kay is on one campus and I'm on the other campus. So in Kay's department, they did a strengths-based assessment. And so each librarian kind of learned where they're good at, where their strengths lie, to be able to move forward in a productive way as a team. So that's one way you can get everyone in the right place, so to speak. And then once you do that within your program, you can look at who else you can work with on campus. So still dealing with the discipline, people, who can we connect with? I'm the TRIO Student Support Services liaison. And if you're not familiar with this program, these are students who are either first generation, they may have a disability, or low income students. So they're already in a position where they may need some extra help. So connecting with a department like that, connecting with multicultural affairs. We have an academic success center and they do workshops. And these are, basic skills workshops for students whose GPA might not be at a certain level. And of course, we all know we have our teaching faculty who we work with when we do our instruction. So the key here is the who comes before the what. So getting people in the right place comes before the next step. This is our final reflective question for the presentation. And we want to know if you have any tips for what you did during this time when we shut down to keep students engaged in the virtual environment.
So as you guys look at the question and try to answer the question, I'm gonna give you some of the tips that we came up with. One of the tips we said to do is to hold kickoff sessions so that we can address concerns that the students may have before we even start our instruction sessions. Secondly, one of the things that we've come across is that some students are camera shy, or for whatever reason, they don't want to have their camera on while they're in a session. So what we did is ask students to display a self-portrait of themselves so that we can have a visual of who they are while we engage virtually. The other things to do would be to set expectations from the very beginning, and create instructional screencasts or videos to enhance students' engagement. And also cater for students who might need closed captioning and the like and other ADA assistance. And introduce active learning exercises that can be adapted to multiple different media formats. For example, like voice boards or digital storyboards or mind maps. And make ideas anonymous between participants, but only known to the facilitator. And the last one I have here would be to remember to align software selection to pedagogical goals. For example, virtual pin boards to present ideas and move them around so as to illustrate connections, which is great for individual note-taking and teamwork. And as we get a little further into this presentation, you'll see that Collins talks about the importance of technology. So I'm going to let Vivian read off some of your answers, some of the tips that you have for us.
The one thing that caught my eye, Kay, is that someone said be empathetic, that they learned that it's important to be empathetic. And I think that we all learned this with each other as well during this time, that, it's already a stressful situation. So we can't really expect students, much less ourselves, to, be engaged at the same level.
Right.
And that's okay. Someone said they provided more individual consultations, which, we did as well via Zoom rather than having just the traditional one-shot sessions. Lots of icebreakers, someone else noted. Someone said they still did in-person instruction as much as possible, which we still were. When we first shut down last year, our departments worked from home for a while, but we did come back in June, the end of June, beginning of July. And so we did have classes, and there was some in-person instruction, which I think the students really appreciated that. Well, with all protocols, safety protocols in place, but our library never actually completely just shut down. We were open by appointment for students to be able to use the computers if they didn't have. One thing we learned quickly, a lot of our students don't have the technology that we assume that they have access to.
Right. Okay. So, according to the Flywheel effect, the strategy is to confront the brutal facts. So what we know is that COVID has caused concern about learning achievement gaps. And so there are some disparities regarding this in terms of the incoming students who just graduated from high school. And when we did our research, what we found is that our readers' survey stated that unprepared students were indeed a problem. So if we look at the chart, the table here, what it says is that students who come to class unprepared proves to be very problematic at 25.69%. And that's a significant number. And again, students who are not prepared for the rigors of college scored 25.08%. So you can see that when you look at the math, at least a quarter of the whole student cohort, if they weren't if they were not prepared for the rigors of college, or they just totally unprepared, presented a problem for the professors or whoever is going to have to deal with them. Obviously, it's going to cause some discomfort. And when we recognize that, we realize the importance of coming up with an informational literacy program that is going to somewhere help to bridge that gap, help to take them from the point of where they're lacking to the point where they should be. And you might ask, what are some of the reasons for the unpreparedness? And it could be that the challenges come with high quality resources and teaching, unequal access. It could be the digital divide. It could also be as a result of disrupted education. It could be a situation of English language fluency. And last but not least, something like the stereotype threat. And you might ask me what the stereotype threat is. Stereotype threat refers to the risk of confirming negative stereotypes about an individual's race, ethnic, gender, or cultural group. The term was coined by two researchers, Claude Steele and Joshua Arson, who performed experiments that showed that Black college students performed worse on standardized tests than their white peers when they were reminded before taking the test that racial groups tend to do poorly on such exams. When their race was not emphasized, however, those Black students performed similarly to their white peers. So here again, we can see why some students would just show up and be labeled unprepared, and probably, even categorized as not being prepared for the rigors of college.
So getting into the core part of our presentation and the Flywheel strategy, which is within the good to great overall concept that we introduced earlier in the presentation. Jim Collins calls this, this is the next step in the process, the Hedgehog Concept. And the reason why it's termed the Hedgehog Concept is because it's based on an ancient Greek parable that distinguishes between foxes, which know many small things. They have many tricks up their sleeves. We all know when we think about foxes as, being cunning, but a hedgehog knows one big thing and has a truly deeper understanding of that one thing. In Jim Collins' research, he found out that leaders within an organization are more like hedgehogs. So they know how to simplify a complex concept into a single organizing idea. So the kind of basic principle that unifies, organizes, and guides all decisions. As we said earlier, this type of model is not a quick thing. It's a, slow strategy that builds momentum over time. And if you look at the flywheel here, you start with your consistent steps. So basically what your plan is for your instruction program. Eventually you see an accumulation of visible results. People get energized once they start to see those results. You build momentum on your flywheel, and then it kind of just goes around and it keeps building on itself. So it's a really interesting idea. And I think it's important because we get so caught up in just our day-to-day work. We don't take the time to step back and truly reflect on if we're approaching things in the best way. So that's the purpose of using this type of strategy within your work. You're muted, Kay.
Three elements that have to be aligned with the Hedgehog concept, and that has to do with passion, strength, and a resource engine. So one of the questions we ask ourselves, what is our organization instruction program designed to do? And you can ask yourself that very same question if you want to apply the 5E strategy. What it is your organization instruction program designed to do? So it goes back to what your instruction mission is. And our goal is to create meaningful learning experiences that foster long-term sustainable growth that is customized to the needs of our students, so as we can be able to maximize the teaching and learning outcomes using this flywheel strategy. The other question that we ask ourselves is, what can our organization contribute? And we ask ourselves that question because we need to look internally. The flywheel strategy is intrinsically about people. So we have to look at who are the folks that work in our instruction department. What does our instruction team look like in terms of their given strengths? And so once we look at that, we can better inform how we are going to design our instruction program. The next question that we had is, what drives our research engine? In our case, our research engine are our instructors, the people that do the work, that make a meaningful difference to our catered audience. Our education and training, the team, the training that our team has, or the continuous training that they engage in, so that we can be on top of our game when we create these programs and actually deliver them. So the COVID-19 pandemic has proven that organizations, including libraries, succeed when their people succeed. In our case, some students experience disrupted learning for several reasons, as mentioned before. And so we wanted to make sure that once we were putting together a program like this, that we had all our, what we say, our ducks in a row. And according to Collins, we have to consider technology in all of this. And he refers to it as technology accelerators. So technology is at the forefront of what we do. And because we're operating more so now in a virtual world, or hybridly between traditional and a virtual world, we have to adapt a universal design for learning approach, and the flywheel effect fits right in there. So according to the Federal Communications Commission, some students, families, schools, and whole communities do not have access to the resources and opportunities high-speed internet can provide. So we have to be aware of that. And so when we plan our programs, we have to cater for that situation in the type of technology we choose or we try to make available for our students. And so where does the information literacy framework fit into the flywheel effect? In essence, these two, the information literacy framework and the flywheel effect, are a good combination in terms of delivering the kind of program that we'd want, taking our program from a good status to a great status. So it lets us answer the burning question, how do we bridge the learning gap for students who spent the past year in a virtual classroom with inadequate support in some cases? What industry techniques should we implement in our flywheel strategy? And there is where the ACRL framework comes in handy. This is where the framework can be applied. Frame by frame, these students will be introduced and instructed on information literacy competencies that impact how they can hone their research skills that are just essential to the whole academic landscape. you know, and beyond. You know, it focuses on how they approach looking for information, finding information, using it, producing it, and how they value information, and they learn ethical ways of creating new knowledge. So without me going through all the frames of the ACRL framework, it is integrally important to the Flywheel strategy, because the Flywheel strategy is a step-by-step process that builds upon the previous knowledge. So you go step by step. And I'm going to read according to the ACRL, the framework is called framework intentionally because it is based on a cluster of interconnected core concepts with flexible options for implementation rather than a set of standards or learning outcomes or any prescriptive enumeration of skills. So it is really adaptable to the Flywheel strategy. So you will say, so what is the manner in which you guys operate? So our current modus operandi is that we incorporate the ACRL framework in one-shot instruction sessions, both in person and virtually. There are a few librarians who are embedded in online courses. Outside of working with teaching faculty across campus, we have librarian Vivian herself, who offers specialized workshops for the TRIO program. I'm going to let her talk a little bit to you about that. It's a program that caters to first-year students, low-income students, and students who need ADA accommodations. And then we partner as well with Academic Success Center and the Multicultural Center on campus as well. And I'm going to let Vivian talk a little bit about the TRIO program that she specifically works with.
So with the TRIO program, the workshops that I do really are introducing the students. They have an incoming group, a new group every semester to the library, because they may or may not have a class where they actually physically come in the library, so they can see where we are and they can have a face and be comfortable coming into the library and asking questions. That can be an issue for students, as you might know. Just even approaching a librarian can be intimidating. So really making them comfortable. When we went virtual last year due to COVID, I did 2 workshops with these students to help them learn about resources that they still have access to. Yes, you may be at home, but these are the things that you can still do with the library. We haven't gone anywhere, and they always, find those types of sessions helpful. With the Academic Success Center, a lot of their workshops are geared towards students who are not meeting their GPA standards, or they might have a particular issue with plagiarism. And the library, we offer a session for them on plagiarism, and also another just basic, these are the things that you need to know about the library. So those have been working pretty well, and hopefully we can expand those workshops over the next couple of years. So if I didn't say this in the beginning, the Flatworld strategy is something that Kay and I have, read about and thought, okay, this would be great to actually implement, but we have not sat down and implemented the strategy itself in the library, so to speak. But we're kind of already doing some of these things. And later on, you're going to see an example of a school that actually took the whole approach. So it might make it a little bit more clear for you. So we identified some ways to improve, which we know that we can offer some more small group instruction sessions. Not every professor brings their students in the library, even in the first year. So we might go to the dorms or go to places where students are and just do some small group things with them. Work to embed more librarians in online classes to help students throughout the entire semester, not just in one session. We all do different things for assessment. So our goal eventually will be to create an assessment tool that is a shared tool amongst all of us so we can track student progress. Incorporate professional development for librarians that talk more about social emotional learning and how important critical information literacy is. And if you're not familiar with that, it's really looking at the social and political aspects behind why information is the way that it is. Develop stronger community connections with high schools so that we can meet students before they even enter the university, and create thoughtful, detailed lesson plans. And we'll very briefly show you a lesson plan that would be good to use in your classes. So if you're like me, you go in your class with notes and you don't necessarily have a lesson plan, but it is a good way to make sure that you're targeting certain things for students. And I'll let Kay talk a little bit about the lesson plan before we show you the example.
Okay, this lesson plan is one that I created in mind because I wanted, the topic I chose was to look at data within use, that's often used in educational setting. And so you can see the goal there. And basically I put together a learning objective, and then I created some tasks which I thought I want the students to do. I want them to learn how to come up with good research questions. So I have them create a research question and build upon that. And the next section, I gave them a background with the definitions for the 3 basic areas of the data. And then on that form, you'll see references and sources. So they'll have a reference and they can tell me which source if they use a almanac or whatever. And then we wanted to have a reflection in there. So we look at what worked well, and then take a look at what we need to cover again. So that's basically how I envision that we'll have put together a lesson plan for using the flywheel effect.
And you all will have a link to access this if it's something that you want to try out. So just a very quick quote from Amanda Folk. Something to keep in mind that, instruction programs really need to consider the micro and macro aspects of learning. So all too often we get caught up in the one shot and what are, very specific things that we need to do short term, but we need to look at it long term as well. We have to consider the racial and social class achievement gaps outside of the instruction classroom. And that's the only way that we're really going to truly make a difference within our program. So I do want to show you an example of a school, and this is actually a middle school, but the things that they did to integrate the Flywheel strategy and the good to great concepts within their system worked well, and it can be done in any type of setting. So the brutal facts for this particular school district was that they were on the state's list for not making adequate yearly progress. This was the time when schools were transitioning from K-8 to middle school settings, so removing 6th through 8th grade and having them separated from the other students. So they designed a program to enhance student learning and empower teachers and principals. So their first initial push on what we're calling the flywheel was getting all of the people involved in the right mindset for change. And so the way that they did this is they used a book discussion. They developed an atmosphere that created open and honest dialogue among the school leadership team about what was not working. They focused on improving relationships with each other, and instead of having a competitive environment, they developed one where more honest sharing about their success and their difficulties took place. They used the Native American concept of wisdom circles to give everyone an equal voice in the room. So the initiatives that came out of this, middle school teachers, they developed an in-house program for helping them become more qualified, so training. They provided training for the principals on how to be better lead managers rather than boss managers based on a book that they read. They created a principal advisory team, later named the Concept Council. And this is where these open and honest discussions took place. They started doing weekly check-ins, and they posted inspirational messages each week on their website to set the tone. And after they implemented these strategies, you'll have a link to read the article yourself so you can see all the details. The results were that they saw an increase in reading and math scores. The district also saw conduct and attendance rates improve, which you can see the numbers here from 2002 to 2003. Within the next year, there was an improvement. So in order to see these types of changes, they actually had to pay really close attention to feedback and the data. So this is just, we wanted to show you an example that people are actually using this. And, it's not necessarily a lot of examples out there, because we don't think that in the education world and nonprofit world, people really consider how these business strategies can be helpful. But hopefully after this, you'll see ways that you can implement it within your library.
Okay, so the flywheel effect basically is about direction. It's about a matter of conscious choice. The direction that you're going to go, it's a forward thrust, step by step with repetitive practice that can be used over and over again purposefully. The focus is on iteration. You take it one frame at a time, and you build on that. It become an organic act so that we can have compounded gains. And then it's based on our actions. The actions give multiplicative effect, just building on the momentum bit by bit. And that's how you bridge the gap.
So we have our references. You'll receive the slides after the presentation, and contact information here if you want to reach out for questions. And I think we probably have about 7 minutes for questions now.
Hi, everybody. I do have the questions. I have some questions here for you. The first question is, to what extent can you use statistics from your ILS to inform librarians about changes in patterns?
So I think a good place to start is developing a shared tool for your program. And you really you should pick whatever area you want to target. So say, for example, you want to look at the first year writing classes. A long time ago, to give you some more background, we're a consolidated university. So my campus used to be Armstrong State University, and we consolidated with Georgia Southern. Pre-consolidation, we had an FYE program where information literacy was integrated into the curriculum. So we had a rubric that professors use. All the professors who taught FYE had an info lit rubric, and they assessed what students knew related to information literacy in the beginning of the semester. And at the end of the semester, they went back and we had a team that went back and looked at the scores. And then we knew from there, okay, these are the things that students need to work on. So I would say that would be the first place to start, really, is looking at where you can integrate those student learning objectives for information literacy into classes. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you. The next question is, what are the most effective ways for librarians to interact with students when they are embedded in the LMS courses or online classes?
I'd say having a relationship with the professor, first of all, and really finding out who those students are individually in the classes, so that you will be able to adjust your communication pattern based on the unique attributes of those students. And so you build basically on knowing your students, knowing what their strengths are, what their needs are, so to speak. And then you use, I'd say, maybe a universal method of interacting with them. So you probably go to the professor, or you'll have set up one-on-one consultations with those who need one-on-one consultations. And maybe in the classroom, you'll develop a pattern where you have wisdom circles where people exchange information with each other. So it just depends on the unique needs of the particular class and the relationship you have with the professors and how much time you're given in each class. Sometimes you'll have a class where you only have 15 minutes. And so you'll have to modify your instruction program or exercise to match the time that you're given. I hope that answers your question. Oops.
What is the percentage of students you both work with are a combination of students who are first-gen learning challenge and working with students who are on academic probation? And also, what percentage of students do you work with who are prepared for college?
I think that's a question to be answered. We don't, those are some statistics that we don't necessarily have access to. For me, working with the TRIO students, I know that they're coming in as first gen, and the Academic Success Center workshops that I do. A lot of for the this campus, more than 50% of our instruction is with first year English and writing classes. So it is a heavy load there for that. And I'm not sure if Kay has something to add.
Similarly, usually if you are embedded in, say, the first year writing program, then you know you deal with all first year students. Or if you're doing, for example, the incoming students in the College of Ed, I have a relationship with some of the professors who say to me, look, I have 4 classes. Of these 4 classes, 3 are our incoming students. So I know for a fact that I'll be dealing with those students directly.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more. How would you or how are you evaluating or determining any needed changes to the flywheel? What are you looking for to make more than minor adjustments?
So I think to make sure I'm interpreting the question correctly. So what are we looking at within our program that we can adjust using the Flywheel strategy? I think that's what the question is.
And the person who submitted the question has said yes. That's
okay. So some of the things that we've identified are getting more librarians embedded into these online classes. In order for us to be able to do that, we're going to have to reconnect with faculty. Because of COVID, we haven't seen the teaching faculty as much. So we're going to have to, for department heads, we have department chairs meetings. So all the department heads on all campuses meet to talk about different issues. So bringing that up in one of those meetings and asking, okay, what is it that your professors are needing for instruction? Doing it that way, making sure that we place ourselves, front and center again when we all come back full force in the fall, doing more small group things rather than relying on those one-shot sessions are other ways. Another thing that we have identified that we can improve.
Thank you so much to our panelists for sharing your expertise with us today. I would also like to thank Alois Sharp as well as everyone at the ACRL office who always help make the magic happen for these presentations. Remember that we will send the link to the recording, the slides, and other information for this session when it's available. And a reminder and request again, if you have a chance to fill out our brief evaluation, which is posted in the chat window. Thank you everyone for coming. Have a great rest of your day.